The night rests gently over the land of ancient Egypt. The stars shine with a quiet brightness above the wide ribbon of the Nile. The river moves without hurry, carrying cool water through a warm country where tomorrow's work is already waiting. The air is softer now than it was beneath the afternoon sun. Palm leaves barely move. Somewhere in the distance, a dog lets out a single bark before becoming quiet again. A small fishing boat rocks gently against a muddy bank, tied with a worn rope that has held many boats through many seasons. Most homes have gone dark. Small oil lamps burn low behind narrow windows cut into mud brick walls. Families sleep close together on woven mats. Their sandals rest near the doorway. Clay jars filled with water wait for the morning. Bread dough, prepared before sunset, rests beneath a cloth. Even while the city sleeps, tomorrow quietly gathers itself. Far away, the eastern sky is still wrapped in darkness, but it will not remain that way forever. Before long, the first workers will rise. Bakers will knead fresh dough. Fishermen will untie their boats. Farmers will lift simple tools onto tired shoulders. Donkeys will begin another slow day along dusty roads. And among all these familiar routines, one place will slowly come alive before almost anywhere else. The market. Not a silent place. Not an empty place. But a place filled with gentle movement, quiet conversations, patient waiting, warm smells, rough textures, and the steady rhythm of ordinary life. Tonight, we wander there slowly. Not to rush through crowded streets. Not to search for famous rulers or great monuments. Instead, we simply listen. We notice the sounds. We breathe the air. We follow the footsteps of people whose names have long been forgotten. Because history is not only written inside temples or carved into stone. Much of it once drifted through places like these, carried by voices, laughter, bargaining, and the smell of fresh bread warming in the morning sun. Long before the streets filled with merchants, the market already belonged to quiet workers. In the deepest part of the night, while many still slept, bakers were awake. Inside low mud brick bakeries, the air became warmer with each passing hour. Clay ovens slowly gathered heat. Dry bundles of reeds crackled beneath them. A baker rubbed flour across rough wooden tables polished smooth by years of use. His hands moved almost without thought. He had repeated these motions thousands of mornings before. The smell of grain slowly filled the room. Freshly ground emmer wheat carried a soft earthy scent. Flour floated gently through beams of lamplight. Someone poured water from a clay jar. Another worker mixed dough with careful strength, folding and pressing until the heavy mixture slowly became smooth. Outside, the streets remained mostly empty. Only an occasional pair of footsteps echoed against stone walls. A woman carrying water balanced a heavy jar upon her head. Two young boys hurried toward the river carrying woven baskets that would later hold fish. Somewhere nearby, a donkey shook its head, making the small bells tied around its neck quietly ring. These little sounds were the first notes of another market day. As the sky slowly turned from black toward deep blue, more doors opened. Families stepped outside into the cooler air before the desert heat arrived. Some stretched stiff muscles after sleeping on woven mats. Others carefully folded blankets before beginning another day of work. Children rubbed sleep from tired eyes. Older people sat quietly near their homes, watching morning arrive little by little. No one hurried. The rhythm of life moved steadily. It always had. The market itself was still only half awake. Wooden stalls stood empty beneath simple cloth coverings. Woven baskets rested upside down upon tables. Clay jars lined the edges of narrow streets. Some merchants had covered their goods overnight with linen cloth to protect them from dust. Soon those cloths would be lifted. Soon colors would return. One merchant arrived carrying onions tied together with plant fibers. Another balanced baskets filled with garlic. A woman slowly arranged fresh herbs gathered from gardens along irrigation canals. Mint, leeks, coriander. Their scents mixed gently with the cool morning air. Nearby, another family unloaded dates harvested only a short time before. Their skins glowed softly in the rising light. Some were dark brown. Others held hints of gold where sunlight had dried them upon the tree. Children helped where they could. Small hands carried lighter baskets. Older brothers lifted heavier sacks. Parents offered quiet instructions rather than loud commands. Everyone understood their place within the morning routine. As sunlight slowly touched the tops of nearby buildings, the first real sounds of the market began to gather. Wood scraped across stone. Clay jars touched one another with hollow knocks. Basket lids lifted. Ropes tightened. Donkeys snorted softly. Sandals brushed dusty ground. No single sound stood alone. Instead they blended together like gentle waves upon the Nile. Nothing rushed. Nothing exploded into noise. The market slowly awakened, one small sound after another. Then came the smell of bread. Warm. Sweet. Comforting. Fresh loaves emerged from hot clay ovens and disappeared almost immediately into waiting baskets. The smell drifted through nearby streets, inviting early customers toward the baker's stall. Some loaves were round. Others were flatter. Some contained figs or dates pressed gently into the dough. Others remained plain, ready to be eaten beside onions, beans, or soft cheese. For many families, bread formed the center of every meal. Without bread, the day felt incomplete. The baker knew many of his customers by face alone. He greeted them with familiar smiles. Coins were not always exchanged. Sometimes bread was traded for vegetables. Sometimes for woven cloth. Sometimes for fish caught only hours before. Ancient Egyptian markets often depended upon careful exchange rather than simple payment. Everyone understood value. A basket of onions might become a loaf of bread. Fresh linen might become cooking oil. A pot carefully shaped by a skilled potter might become enough grain to feed a family for many days. The market breathed through these quiet agreements. Nearby, fish sellers prepared their places. The smell changed. Fresh river water mixed with the scent of fish resting upon damp reeds. Some fish still shimmered beneath the morning light. Others had already been cleaned and salted for longer storage. Fishermen spoke calmly as they arranged their catch. Their hands showed years of hard work. Small cuts marked rough fingers. Sun-darkened skin told stories of long afternoons spent beneath open skies. The Nile had shaped their lives since childhood. Its gentle currents provided food. Its floods nourished fields. Its banks became roads. Its waters connected villages far apart. Every fish carried a little piece of that river into the marketplace. Cats quietly wandered nearby. They knew exactly where fish could be found. Some sat patiently with bright eyes fixed upon the baskets. Others walked beneath tables, hopeful but respectful. The merchants watched them carefully. Every so often a hand waved gently. The cat stepped back. Not frightened. Only waiting. They had learned patience as well. As the sun climbed higher, more people entered the market. Farmers arrived carrying vegetables balanced across wooden poles resting upon their shoulders. Bundles of lettuce. Fresh cucumbers. beans, radishes, green herbs still wet from morning watering. Dust clung to sandals after long walks from nearby fields. The smell of rich soil remained upon freshly pulled vegetables. Some roots still carried tiny pieces of earth. Customers welcomed this. It meant the harvest was fresh. The market slowly filled with color. White linen clothing, brown woven baskets, golden bread, green vegetables, red pottery, blue beads catching sunlight, palm baskets filled with yellow grain. Nothing seemed perfectly arranged. Everything appeared naturally placed through daily habit. Here and there stood scribes. Unlike many others, their hands remained smoother. Instead of carrying heavy baskets, they carried writing tools. Sheets of papyrus rested beneath one arm. Reed pens tucked neatly into small cases. Black and red ink waited inside carefully prepared containers. Some scribes recorded business agreements. Others helped merchants calculate exchanges. Many people could not write. The scribe became an important bridge between spoken promises and written memory. His quiet work added another gentle sound to the market. The soft scratching of reed upon papyrus. Almost unnoticed, yet always present. The smell of ink mixed faintly with dust warmed by sunlight. Nearby, potters displayed their work. Rows of jars stood patiently together. Large storage vessels. Small drinking cups. Cooking pots blackened slightly from firing. Their surfaces felt cool before the day grew hotter. Some pottery remained simple. Others showed painted designs inspired by birds, plants, rivers, or flowing patterns remembered across generations. Customers lifted each piece carefully. They tapped gently with fingertips. A clear sound suggested careful firing. A dull sound warned of hidden weakness. Experience taught these little tests. No one rushed such decisions. Choosing a good water jar meant trusting it through many seasons. Beyond the pottery stood cloth merchants. Long strips of linen moved softly whenever the breeze wandered through narrow streets. Some cloth felt coarse for working clothes. Other pieces felt smoother, prepared for wealthier households or special occasions. Women rubbed fabric between careful fingers. They judged quality through touch as much as sight. Nearby, spinners quietly twisted flax fibers into thread. Their fingers never seemed to stop moving. Even while speaking with neighbors, they continued their work. The spinning itself created a tiny whispering sound. Almost like insects hidden among reeds beside the Nile. Easy to overlook. Comforting once noticed. As the morning became brighter, voices multiplied. Not loud. Not chaotic. Gentle conversations overlapped naturally. Questions. Greetings. Simple negotiations. News from nearby villages. Stories about harvests. Concerns over river levels. Plans for family gatherings. Small children called softly for parents. Friends recognized one another across narrow lanes. Older neighbors paused beneath shade to rest while talking quietly. The market was not only a place for buying. It was where lives crossed each day. Information traveled as easily as baskets of grain. A traveler arriving from another town often carried news long before official messengers appeared. People listened with interest while continuing their work. Hands kept arranging vegetables. Bread kept selling. Fish kept changing owners. Life continued without interruption. The sun climbed higher still. Warmth settled across stone streets. The smell of dust slowly strengthened. Every passing sandal lifted tiny clouds that drifted through shafts of light. Workers wiped sweat from brows with linen cloths. Clay water jars became more valuable as temperatures rose. Many stalls kept drinking water beneath damp coverings to preserve coolness for as long as possible. Customers paused gratefully for small cups before continuing their shopping. Even the donkeys seemed slower now. Their steady hooves continued along familiar paths. Leather straps creaked gently. Heavy baskets balanced across their backs held grain, pottery, reeds, or bundles of wood. They knew these streets almost as well as their owners. Sometimes they stopped exactly where expected without needing guidance. Years of repetition had quietly taught them. The market settled into its full rhythm. Not hurried. Not still. Simply alive. And as the warm air carried together the smell of bread, herbs, fresh vegetables, river fish, sun-warmed linen, damp clay, smoke from cooking fires, and the faint sweetness of ripe dates, it became clear that this place was remembered not by monuments, but by ordinary mornings that returned again and again with comforting familiarity. Tomorrow the market would awaken in much the same way. And the day after that. For generations, these sounds and smells quietly marked the passing of time, while the Nile continued its patient journey beneath the endless Egyptian sky. The market had now reached the gentle middle of its morning. The first rush of arriving merchants had faded into a quieter rhythm. Most of the stalls were open, their woven awnings casting welcome patches of shade across the dusty ground. The sun climbed a little higher with every passing moment, warming the stone beneath countless sandals. The coolness of dawn had become only a memory, replaced by the familiar heat that every Egyptian expected and accepted. The streets between the market stalls were never perfectly straight. They curved gently around older buildings, wells, storage rooms, and walls that had stood for many years. Some paths were wide enough for two donkeys to pass one another with little trouble. Others became narrow passages where neighbors stepped aside with patient smiles. Dust rested lightly over everything. It gathered on sandals. It settled on baskets. It covered the edges of clay jars. Even the finest linen carried a thin layer before the day was done. No one thought much about it. Dust belonged to the market just as surely as bread and grain did. Near one entrance, an elderly woman slowly arranged bundles of fresh onions. Her hands moved carefully, not because she was uncertain, but because many years of work had taught her there was no reason to hurry. Every onion was turned so its best side faced outward. Loose leaves were gently removed. The smallest onions were gathered together in one basket, while the larger ones rested in another. People knew her well. She had stood in nearly the same place through many seasons. Children who had once followed their mothers through the market were now grown adults bringing their own children to buy vegetables from the same familiar hands. Some traditions did not need to be written. They simply continued from one generation to the next. Across the lane, a young man carried jars filled with thick honey. Bees had gathered nectar from flowers growing along the fertile edges of the Nile, where green fields met the dry desert beyond. The honey caught the morning light, glowing like warm amber inside smooth pottery. He handled every jar with great care. Honey was precious. It sweetened bread. It flavored cakes prepared for festivals. Sometimes it was offered at temples. Sometimes healers mixed it into simple medicines. The rich scent floated gently through the warm air whenever a lid was lifted. Not far away, another pleasant smell drifted through the market. It was the smell of roasting grain. A woman sat beside a shallow clay pan over glowing coals, gently stirring barley with a wooden spoon. The grain slowly darkened, releasing a warm, nutty fragrance that mixed softly with the scent of fresh bread nearby. People passing by smiled as they noticed it. Many had known that smell since childhood. It reminded them of family meals prepared after long days in the fields. It reminded them of cool evenings when work was finally finished. Even in a crowded marketplace, familiar smells could quietly carry memories. The marketplace was full of such small reminders. The smell of fresh-cut reeds brought thoughts of boats waiting beside the river. The scent of damp clay reminded potters of busy workshops. The fragrance of crushed herbs brought memories of home gardens carefully watered each morning. Each smell belonged somewhere. Each carried its own story. As the day continued, more craftsmen arrived carrying the work of their hands. A basket maker spread out neatly woven containers of every size. Some were small enough to hold a handful of dates. Others were large enough to carry grain harvested from wide fields after the annual flood. The baskets themselves had a gentle smell. Dry reeds, river grasses, palm fibers warmed by sunlight. Fresh weaving always carried the scent of the plants from which it had been made. Customers lifted them carefully. They pressed lightly against the woven sides. They checked the handles. A strong basket might serve a family for many years. Beside him sat an old rope maker. His fingers were rough and deeply lined. Even while waiting for customers, he continued twisting long strands of plant fiber together. His hands never seemed to rest. Twist. Pull. Tighten. Twist again. The movement was steady enough to become almost hypnotic. The rope slowly grew longer across his lap. People walking past hardly noticed. It was simply another familiar part of the market's endless rhythm. Nearby, a woodworker displayed simple furniture. Low stools. Storage chests. Small tables. Wood was more valuable than many people realize today. Good timber was not always easy to find in Egypt. Craftsmen used every piece carefully. Fresh-cut wood carried a pleasant scent that mixed gently with sawdust lying beneath the workbench. A customer slowly ran his hand across the smooth surface of a finished stool. The carpenter smiled quietly. He knew the value of careful workmanship. He had spent many patient hours shaping each piece beneath the shade of his workshop roof. The market was filled with skilled hands. Hands that baked. Hands that carved. Hands that fished. Hands that planted. Hands that carried heavy loads every day. These hands rarely appeared in temple carvings. Few scribes recorded their names. Yet they built the daily life of Egypt one ordinary task at a time. Not every sound came from people. Pigeons fluttered overhead, landing on roof edges where crumbs often gathered. Sparrows darted between awnings. They searched for scattered grain beneath the feet of busy shoppers. Their cheerful chirping floated above the quieter conversations below. Sometimes a child laughed as birds suddenly took flight together. Their wings created a brief rush of air before settling again nearby. Cats still wandered patiently through the market. Some rested beneath shaded carts where the ground remained cooler. Others stretched lazily before continuing their search for forgotten scraps of fish. The merchants accepted their presence. Cats helped keep mice away from precious stores of grain. In return, they found food and shelter among familiar people. Many seemed to know exactly which merchants were most likely to share a small treat. Around the middle of the morning, the scent of perfume began to appear. Not the strong perfumes of later centuries. These were softer. Simple oils scented with flowers, herbs, or resin. A perfume seller opened tiny jars one at a time, allowing customers to smell each fragrance. One carried the sweetness of lotus blossoms gathered from calm water. Another held the rich scent of myrrh. Another carried hints of cedar brought from distant lands. People applied these oils sparingly. A drop upon the wrist. A touch behind the ear. A little rubbed into hair or beard. In the growing heat, the gentle fragrances mixed with everything else around them. Warm linen. Fresh bread. Dry reeds. Dusty roads. Clay. Smoke. Together they formed the living scent of an Egyptian marketplace. No single smell lasted very long. The breeze shifted constantly. One moment brought the aroma of baking. The next carried fish from the river. Then herbs. Then warm animals. Then fresh water poured from a cool jar. Every breath told a slightly different story. Near the center of the market stood several water cellars. Large clay jars rested beneath damp cloths to keep the water as cool as possible. Travelers stopped gratefully. Farm workers wiped sweat from their faces before taking slow drinks. Children smiled as cool water eased the growing warmth of the day. The sound of pouring water became another quiet part of the market. A steady splash. Clay cup against clay jar. Soft words of thanks. The water itself came from the Nile, carried carefully in large containers before sunrise. Every drop mattered. Without the river, none of this daily life could exist. The Nile fed the grain. The grain became bread. The bread fed the workers. The workers built homes, harvested crops, crafted tools, and filled the market with life. Everything returned, in one way or another, to the patient river flowing beyond the city. As the sun continued its slow climb, shadows grew shorter. Merchants adjusted their woven awnings. Some tied additional cloth overhead to create larger patches of shade. Customers naturally gathered where the sunlight could not easily reach. Shade became its own kind of comfort. People lingered there a little longer. Conversation slowed. No one wished to hurry back into the bright open streets. An old storyteller sat beneath one such awning. He was not performing for a crowd. Instead, a few neighbors rested nearby while he quietly shared memories from many years ago. Perhaps he spoke of floods that had risen higher than expected. Perhaps he remembered harvests of unusual abundance. Perhaps he recalled familiar faces no longer walking through the market. His listeners nodded gently. They had heard some of these stories before. That did not lessen their value. Certain stories became part of the place itself. They returned like the seasons. Children sitting nearby listened with wide eyes while pretending not to. Years later, they would remember those same stories and pass them to others. History often traveled through simple conversations far more than through written records. Nearby, two scribes carefully compared measurements of grain. Wooden measuring containers stood neatly beside them. They checked each amount patiently. Fairness mattered. Trust allowed the market to function peacefully. A merchant known for honest dealings found loyal customers returning year after year. Reputation spread quietly through everyday experience. No loud announcements were needed. People remembered. As the morning drifted toward midday, the warmth became heavier. The market did not become silent. Instead, its sounds softened. Voices lowered. Movements slowed. Animals rested whenever possible. Even the pigeons sought the cooler edges of shaded roofs. Some merchants sat on low stools while waiting for customers. Others mended baskets or repaired tools during quiet moments. Work never truly stopped. It simply changed pace. The smell of cooking grew stronger. Several families prepared simple meals beside their stalls. Flat bread warmed over small fires. Beans simmered gently in clay pots. Onions roasted until their sharpness softened into sweetness. Someone cut fresh cucumbers into a wooden bowl. Another poured thick beer made from grain into small cups. The smell was humble and comforting. Nothing extravagant. Only food prepared to satisfy people who had already worked for many hours. Children gathered eagerly. After helping their parents all morning, they welcomed a chance to rest in the shade while eating. Their laughter drifted softly through the air. Not loud enough to disturb the peaceful rhythm. Just another reminder that the marketplace was as much a gathering place as a place of trade. Life unfolded here every day. Births were celebrated. Marriages discussed. Neighbors reunited. Travelers welcomed. News exchanged. Problems quietly solved. The market carried more than goods. It carried the gentle heartbeat of the community itself. And above it all, the warm Egyptian sun continued its steady journey across the sky, while the scents of bread, herbs, clay, smoke, fresh water, honey, grain, linen, and river reeds rose together into the still afternoon air, becoming part of another ordinary day that would soon settle into memory before returning again with tomorrow's peaceful dawn. By the time the sun stood high above the marketplace, the light had become bright enough to soften many colors beneath its warmth. The shadows that had stretched across the streets during the early morning were now short and close to the feet of the people who walked there. Heat shimmered gently above the dusty roads, and even the stones beneath worn sandals held the warmth of the day. No one seemed surprised by it. The people of Egypt had known this heat since childhood. They understood how the day breathed. The cool hours belonged to the morning. The heavy hours belonged to the middle of the day. The gentle hours would return again when evening slowly approached. So the market adjusted itself, just as it always had. The loudest voices became softer. People walked more slowly. Merchants reached for clay cups filled with cool water. Donkeys paused beneath the shade of date palms whenever they could. Everything continued, but with a quieter rhythm. A light breeze wandered through the narrow streets, carrying tiny grains of sand that settled gently across baskets and folded linen. The breeze also carried another familiar smell. It was the smell of warm stone. Stone walls that had been cool before sunrise were now slowly giving back the sun's heat. The scent was faint, almost impossible to describe, yet everyone who lived beside the Nile would have recognized it. Mixed with dust and sunlight, it became part of the afternoon itself. Near the center of the market, a family of potters had arranged their work beneath a simple woven roof. Rows of jars stood patiently beside one another. Large storage vessels waited beside narrow-necked water jars. Small bowls rested in careful circles. Oil lamps no bigger than a pair of hands filled one corner of the display. The clay had been shaped from rich mud gathered beside the Nile after the yearly flood. That same river that watered fields also gave potters the earth they needed for their craft. One young apprentice carefully polished the edge of a finished bowl with a smooth stone. He worked slowly. There was no reason to hurry. Every movement had been taught by his father. His father had learned it from his own father before him. Some skills traveled through families for longer than anyone could remember. As customers lifted different pots, they listened carefully. A gentle tap with one finger revealed much about the firing. A clear ringing sound suggested strong clay. A dull sound might warn of hidden cracks. The potter watched quietly. He answered questions with calm patience. He understood that every family wanted a vessel that would safely carry water home. Nearby, another merchant sold woven mats. The mats were made from reeds gathered along quiet canals where birds nested among thick green plants. Fresh reeds carried a pleasant earthy smell. The woven fibers felt cool beneath the fingertips. Some mats would cover sleeping floors inside mud brick homes. Others would shade rooftops where families gathered during warm evenings. Some would be carried into boats. Others would become simple walls dividing workspaces inside crowded homes. Even the simplest object often served many purposes. Nothing was wasted if it could still be useful. A little farther along the market lane, the scent of dried herbs floated through the warm air. Bundles hung upside down beneath an awning where they stayed protected from the strongest sunlight. Mint, dill, coriander, fennel, chamomile. The leaves had dried slowly, preserving both their fragrance and their usefulness. Some herbs flavored food. Others soothed tired stomachs. Some freshened the air inside homes. Others were prepared by healers for small illnesses that every family experienced from time to time. The herb seller knew each bundle by touch as much as by sight. Without looking, her fingers could recognize different stems and leaves. Years of practice had made every movement gentle and certain. She smiled kindly as neighbors stopped to ask quiet questions. Sometimes they bought only a handful. Sometimes they simply exchanged greetings before continuing on their way. The marketplace encouraged such small conversations. People rarely rushed away after every purchase. There was always another familiar face to greet. Another neighbor resting beneath the shade. Another cousin arriving with baskets from nearby fields. Another traveler bringing news from villages farther down the Nile. News traveled slowly. It moved at the speed of walking feet, patient boats, and loaded donkeys. That slowness gave every story time to settle. People listened carefully. They asked gentle questions. No one interrupted with great haste. The conversation itself became part of the day's work. Near one corner of the market, a fisherman repaired his net. He had sold most of his morning catch, and now he sat cross-legged beneath a woven shelter where the shade protected him from the strongest heat. His fingers moved through the net almost automatically. Find the broken knot. Pull the cord. Tie another. Trim the loose fiber. Move to the next. The rhythm repeated again and again. The net slowly became whole once more. Children passing nearby slowed their steps to watch. One little boy looked closely at the careful knots. The fisherman noticed. Without saying much, he smiled and showed the child how the cord crossed itself before tightening into place. The boy tried with clumsy fingers. His knot came loose almost immediately. The fisherman laughed softly. Not to tease him. Only because every skilled pair of hands had once struggled exactly the same way. Learning came one quiet attempt at a time. The smell of the river still lingered on the old fisherman's clothing. Fresh water. Wet reeds. Fish scales. Sun-dried rope. To someone who had spent a lifetime beside the Nile, those scents were comforting. They smelled like home. Not far away, a donkey driver rested beside his animals. The donkeys lowered their heads while chewing slowly from woven feed bags. Their ears twitched whenever flies wandered too close. Every so often one stamped a hoof against the ground before becoming still again. Leather harnesses creaked quietly as the animals shifted their weight. The driver gently rubbed one donkey's neck. They had traveled together for years. The animal recognized his voice. There was trust between them that had been built over countless journeys along dusty roads. Merchants depended upon such faithful animals. Without them, grain would not reach the market. Clay jars would remain in distant villages. Fresh vegetables would spoil before arriving. The marketplace owed much of its quiet life to patient creatures carrying heavy loads without complaint. As the afternoon warmth deepened, the smell of fresh bread changed. The morning loaves had mostly been sold. Now bakers prepared another batch for those who would return home later in the day. The ovens glowed softly. Dry wood crackled beneath clay walls blackened by many years of use. The baker brushed flour from his arms before shaping another round loaf. His hands were covered with tiny traces of white dust. Even his beard carried a little flour after hours of work. He did not notice anymore. It had become part of his daily life. Nearby, a young girl carefully stacked finished loaves inside woven baskets lined with linen cloth. Steam rose gently into the warm air. The smell drifted through the marketplace once more. Rich, warm, comforting. Many people paused for just a moment as they passed. Bread carried a promise that the day's work would eventually end with a simple meal shared at home. The smell alone could bring quiet thoughts of family. Across the lane, several women sat together spinning flax into thread. Their wooden spindles turned smoothly between practiced fingers. Twist. Spin. Pull. Wrap. Again. The soft movement produced only the faintest whisper. Their conversation flowed just as gently. They spoke about children growing taller. About fields that would soon need tending. About relatives visiting during the coming season. About bread that had baked especially well that morning. Ordinary conversations. Small moments. The kind that fill most human lives. One woman occasionally laughed. Not loudly. Just enough to brighten the faces around her. The others smiled before returning to their work. No one stopped spinning. Their hands knew the movements without needing much attention. Years of practice had made the work almost peaceful. Nearby, a scribe sat beneath a narrow awning where the shade protected delicate sheets of papyrus. The air smelled faintly of ink. His reed pen scratched softly across the smooth surface. Names. Numbers. Agreements. Lists of grain. Records of cloth. Carefully written lines that would help merchants remember what memory alone might one day forget. Around him, the market continued its gentle rhythm. He hardly looked up. He had learned to write while surrounded by voices, footsteps, animals, and everyday life. The sounds no longer distracted him. Instead, they formed a quiet background that had accompanied nearly every page he had ever written. A pair of travelers entered the market from the southern road. Their sandals carried fresh dust from many miles away. The smell of distant fields clung to their clothing. They paused beside a water cellar, washing their faces before taking long, grateful drinks. The cool water eased the warmth that had gathered during their journey. Nearby merchants greeted them kindly. Travelers always brought something new. Sometimes unusual goods. Sometimes unfamiliar stories. Sometimes simply fresh greetings from people living farther along the river. The marketplace welcomed them all. Children continued weaving between adults with surprising ease. They carried small baskets. Delivered messages. Helped older relatives. Some chased one another briefly before remembering they still had work to do. Their laughter floated lightly through the air like birds crossing above the rooftops. Older people smiled without interrupting them. The marketplace belonged to every generation. Young feet. Old hands. Everyone found a place within its gentle order. Beyond the crowded lanes, the Nile flowed with its quiet certainty. Although hidden behind buildings from many parts of the market, its presence could always be felt. The air remained slightly cooler near the river. Boats continued arriving with fresh goods. Water birds called from the reeds. Some merchants glanced toward the river from time to time, wondering if another boat carrying grain or fruit had reached the landing. The marketplace and the Nile lived together like old friends. Neither could imagine life without the other. The afternoon continued to unfold without hurry. Voices remained calm. The smell of herbs blended with warm bread. Clay jars cooled beneath damp cloth. Fresh vegetables rested beneath woven shades. Cats stretched lazily beneath carts. Pigeons fluttered from rooftop to rooftop. The market did not seek to impress anyone. It simply carried on with the quiet work that had sustained generations. And as the sunlight slowly softened, almost too gradually to notice, the people of the market sensed that the busiest hours were beginning to pass. Yet no one rushed toward evening. There was still bread to bake, baskets to carry, cloth to fold, nets to mend, and gentle conversations to finish beneath the patient Egyptian sky, where another peaceful day continued to unfold one quiet moment at a time. The afternoon settled gently across the marketplace, wrapping every street and every shaded corner in a warm, quiet stillness. The busiest hours had begun to soften, though the market remained full of life. It simply moved at a slower pace now, as if the entire city had taken a long, calm breath. The sunlight changed almost without anyone noticing. The bright white light of midday slowly became warmer. Mud brick walls reflected a gentle golden glow. Palm trunks stretched slightly longer shadows across the dusty paths. The woven roofs above the market stalls blocked just enough sunlight to create cool islands where people naturally gathered. Some merchants remained standing, greeting customers with patient smiles. Others sat on low wooden stools, grateful for a few moments of rest while waiting for the next visitor. No one seemed anxious about the passing of time. Tomorrow would bring another market day. There would always be another sunrise over the Nile. At one end of the marketplace, where the streets widened before reaching the riverbank, several boats had quietly arrived during the afternoon. The river never truly rested. Even while the market carried on its familiar rhythm, narrow wooden boats drifted toward the landing place with fresh goods gathered from villages both near and far. One boat carried baskets overflowing with figs. Their soft skins showed shades of purple and deep green. Some had split slightly in the warmth, revealing sweet flesh inside. Their fragrance drifted gently through the air before the baskets had even reached the market. Children passing nearby slowed their steps. The smell was impossible to ignore. It carried the sweetness of late summer. Another boat arrived carrying bundles of papyrus reeds. Freshly cut from marshes beside quiet canals, they still held the cool scent of river water. The workers unloaded them carefully. Some reeds would become writing material. Others would be woven into mats, baskets, sandals, or lightweight screens that shaded windows from the afternoon sun. Nothing from the Nile was without purpose. The river gave generously, and its gifts found their way into nearly every home. The men carrying the heavy bundles moved with practiced balance. Each bundle rested comfortably across broad shoulders. They walked slowly, conserving energy beneath the growing heat. Sweat darkened the collars of their linen garments. Dust clung to damp skin almost immediately. Still, no one complained. This was simply another ordinary afternoon. The work would end when the sun allowed it. Near the river landing sat an old boat builder. His market stall was unlike most others. Instead of food or cloth, it held carefully carved wooden tools. Small paddles, wooden pegs, coiled ropes, pieces of polished timber. Tiny carved models of boats rested near the front, showing different styles used along the Nile. Visitors often stopped to admire them. Children especially enjoyed looking closely at the miniature boats. Some imagined themselves sailing toward distant temples or quiet fishing villages. The old craftsman welcomed every curious face. He enjoyed explaining how each part of a boat fit together. His voice remained calm and steady. His weathered hands traced the curves of the tiny wooden hulls as gently as though they were full-sized vessels floating upon the river itself. The smell surrounding his stall differed from the rest of the market. Fresh wood, tree resin, linseed oil. Smooth shavings curled across the ground beneath his bench. Occasionally he picked up a small carving knife and shaped another piece while speaking with visitors. Thin ribbons of wood fell silently onto the earth. Nearby, another familiar sound quietly filled the air. Tap, tap, tap. A stonemason carefully shaped a small limestone block. His hammer was not heavy. Its steady rhythm echoed softly between nearby buildings. Each strike was gentle but precise. He was not carving a monument. Instead, he shaped simple household objects. Grinding stones, small offering bowls, lamp holders. Useful things that families depended upon every day. The fine white dust gathered around his feet. When the breeze wandered past, it carried the faint scent of freshly cut stone. The market held hundreds of such tiny sounds. The scratching of baskets sliding across packed earth. The brushing of linen against linen. The rustle of palm leaves overhead. The creak of leather straps. The splash of water poured into waiting jars. The quiet murmur of neighbors greeting one another. None of these sounds demanded attention. Together they formed the gentle music of daily life. A young mother slowly guided her little daughter through the marketplace. The child held tightly to one finger of her mother's hand. Everything around her seemed fascinating. The colors. The smells. The animals. The rows of vegetables. The bright blue beads hanging from one merchant's display. Every few steps she paused to look more closely. Her mother never hurried her. She understood that the market looked very different through the eyes of someone still discovering the world. At one stall they stopped beside baskets filled with lentils and beans. The merchant smiled kindly. He scooped a handful into the little girl's palm. The smooth beans slipped between her fingers before dropping softly back into the basket. She giggled quietly. The merchant laughed with her. It was a small moment. One that no scribe would ever write down. Yet it became part of the life of the marketplace all the same. Farther along the street, the smell of dried dates blended with roasted sesame. A family had begun preparing small cakes for the evening meal. The mixture of crushed dates, grain, and honey was pressed gently into round shapes before being baked over glowing coals. The sweet aroma drifted through nearby stalls. Workers returning from long hours in the fields often looked forward to such simple treats. Not every day brought sweetness. That made it all the more appreciated when it appeared. The woman tending the fire adjusted the clay oven with a wooden paddle. Tiny sparks floated upward before disappearing into the warm afternoon light. The cakes browned slowly. She watched them with patient attention. Good baking required observation more than speed. Across the narrow lane, several elderly men rested beneath a large sycamore fig tree whose branches reached above the market walls. The shade beneath it was cooler than almost anywhere else nearby. They sat on woven mats, sharing cups of water while speaking softly about the river. One remembered a flood many years earlier that had reached farther than expected. Another recalled seasons when fish had been especially plentiful. A third quietly spoke of his father, who had once worked these same streets selling woven baskets. Their memories flowed gently from one story to another. No one interrupted. Long pauses settled comfortably between sentences. The silence itself seemed welcome. Occasionally they simply listened to the sounds around them. Children laughing. Birds calling. Merchants speaking. Donkeys shifting their weight. The marketplace continued around them like the steady current of the Nile. Nearby, a young apprentice carefully swept dust from the entrance to his master's workshop. It seemed almost impossible. The dust returned almost as quickly as he cleared it away. Still, he continued. Sweep. Gather. Lift. Carry away. The task itself mattered. A tidy workshop welcomed customers. His master nodded with quiet approval. The apprentice smiled. Small praise meant much to someone still learning. Inside the workshop, bronze tools rested neatly upon wooden shelves. The metal carried its own faint scent, warmed by the afternoon sun. Some tools would shape wood. Others would cut leather. Some repaired farming equipment before the next planting season. Every craftsman depended upon good tools, and every tool required someone skilled enough to make it. As the afternoon wore on, shadows slowly lengthened across the market once more. The change was gradual. Almost invisible from one moment to the next. Yet everyone felt it. The fiercest heat slowly loosened its grip. The breeze returned more often from the direction of the Nile. It carried moisture from the water along with the soft smell of wet reeds and distant mudbanks. Many merchants lifted their faces for just a moment when the cooler air arrived. It was a simple comfort. Nothing more. Nothing less. The birds seemed to notice as well. Pigeons fluttered down to search for scattered grain. Swallows darted gracefully overhead, catching insects that danced above the streets. Their wings flashed briefly in the lowering sunlight before disappearing beyond nearby rooftops. A small herd of goats passed carefully along one edge of the market. Their shepherd guided them patiently toward home before darkness arrived. Tiny bells tied around a few of their necks rang softly with each step. Children turned to watch them pass. The goats seemed completely unbothered by the busy marketplace. They had walked this route many times before. Near the grain sellers, workers carefully measured the day's remaining sacks. Large baskets that had been full before sunrise now stood nearly empty. The smell of fresh grain still lingered in the air. Warm. Nutty. Comforting. A few loose kernels lay scattered across the ground where sparrows eagerly searched for them. Nothing useful remained unnoticed for long. As the sun continued its slow journey toward the western horizon, the marketplace entered one of its most peaceful hours. There was still work to do. Still customers arriving. Still bread baking. Still water pouring from cool clay jars. But every movement seemed gentler now. The day had reached a quieter rhythm. Voices softened. Footsteps slowed. The scents of figs, fresh bread, herbs, warm stone, polished wood, river reeds, and sweet cakes drifted together through the golden light, while beyond the market the patient Nile flowed onward, just as it had for countless generations, carrying tomorrow gently toward another calm Egyptian dawn. The afternoon slowly leaned toward evening, though the sun still rested comfortably above the western horizon. Its light had softened into a warm gold that settled gently across the market. The harsh brightness of midday was gone, replaced by a glow that seemed to touch every mud brick wall, every woven basket, and every clay jar with quiet kindness. The air felt different now. The heat remained, but it no longer pressed so heavily upon tired shoulders. A breeze wandered inland from the Nile. It slipped between narrow streets and beneath woven awnings, carrying with it the cool scent of flowing water. People welcomed it without saying a word. Some simply paused for a moment. Others closed their eyes briefly as the breeze passed across warm faces. Even the donkeys seemed to lift their heads a little higher. The market had entered its gentlest hours. Many of the day's largest trades had already been completed. Grain had changed hands. Fish had found new homes. Fresh vegetables had filled baskets carried by mothers, servants, and young apprentices. Now the market belonged more to conversation than to hurried work. Neighbors lingered beside familiar stalls. Friends who had crossed paths during the busy morning finally had time to speak at ease. Merchants rested on low stools while customers looked carefully over the goods that remained. Nothing felt rushed. There would always be another day. Near a stall shaded by broad palm leaves, a linen merchant carefully folded cloth that had rested on display since dawn. The linen had moved gently in the breeze throughout the day, catching sunlight whenever the awning lifted slightly. Now he smoothed each piece with slow hands before placing it into neat stacks. The cloth carried the faint smell of clean flax. It reminded many people of freshly washed garments drying outside family homes. Some pieces were plain enough for everyday work. Others were woven with exceptional care, their threads lying so evenly that they almost shimmered in the afternoon light. A young bride-to-be stood nearby with her mother. They touched the fabric together. The older woman rubbed the linen gently between her fingers. She smiled with quiet approval. The merchant waited patiently. He understood that choosing cloth for a new household was never a decision to be hurried. A few stalls away, the leather worker continued his careful craft. The smell of tanned leather mixed softly with beeswax and oil. Simple sandals rested in rows upon a wooden shelf. Each pair had been shaped by hand. The leather still showed tiny marks where careful knives had trimmed the edges. The craftsman held one sandal in his lap, smoothing the straps with a polished stone until they became softer beneath the touch. His tools were simple. A sharp blade. An awl. Wooden forms shaped like feet. Waxed thread. Nothing more. Yet from these ordinary tools came footwear that would carry farmers through muddy fields, merchants across long roads, and children through years of growing footsteps. Nearby, an elderly shepherd had stopped beside the market before beginning the walk home. His flock rested quietly beyond the busiest streets. A few sheep cropped at sparse grass growing near the riverbank. Tiny bells tied around their necks rang softly whenever one wandered a little too far. The shepherd himself entered the market carrying a small skin bag of fresh milk. He greeted the cheese seller as an old friend. Neither man hurried their conversation. They spoke of grazing land. They spoke of river levels. They spoke of grandchildren who seemed to grow taller with every season. Their words drifted gently through the warm air, as familiar as the market itself. The cheese seller uncovered several round wheels resting beneath damp cloth. A cool earthy scent escaped as the cloth was lifted. Fresh cheese had been made only that morning. Its pale surface still held tiny marks from woven baskets where it had drained. Nearby stood clay jars filled with thick yogurt. The jars remained partly buried in cool sand to keep them from warming too quickly. A customer tasted a small piece before making a quiet purchase. No loud praise was needed. Good food spoke for itself. As the hours passed, more workers from the surrounding fields began arriving. Their day's labor had finally ended. They walked slowly toward the market with dust upon their legs and sunlight still clinging to their shoulders. Their linen garments showed the marks of honest work. Some carried simple hoes across one shoulder. Others balanced bundles of reeds gathered from irrigation canals. Many paused first at the water cellars. The splash of cool water into clay cups became more frequent once again. One farmer drank slowly. Not because he lacked thirst, but because cool water deserved to be appreciated after long hours beneath the sun. He poured a little into his hands and gently washed the dust from his face. The water darkened the earth beneath his feet before disappearing into the thirsty ground. Close by, a young boy helped his grandfather sell garlic and onions. The older man's back had become slightly bent over the years. Lifting heavy baskets no longer came as easily as it once had. Without being asked, the boy carried the larger loads. He arranged fresh bundles upon the stall while his grandfather spoke kindly with customers. Their work fit together naturally. The older man brought experience. The younger brought strength. Neither could have done quite the same work alone. Many families in the marketplace worked this way. Knowledge passed quietly from old hands to young ones. Lessons rarely required long speeches. Children learned by watching, by carrying, by repeating, by making small mistakes and trying again. Every market day became another classroom. Near the edge of the square, a woman sold woven fans made from palm leaves. As the afternoon warmth lingered, customers often stopped to examine them. Each fan had been woven with remarkable care. The leaves overlapped in neat patterns. Smooth wooden handles rested comfortably in the hand. The fans carried the fresh scent of dried palm. When lifted gently through the air, they created a cool breeze that offered welcome relief. Children enjoyed helping. They eagerly tested the fans before handing them back with shy smiles. The woman laughed softly each time. She remembered doing exactly the same thing when she had been their age. The marketplace held many such circles of memory. Parents remembered themselves in their children. Grandparents recognized familiar expressions from long ago. The market changed little from year to year. Faces grew older. New babies arrived. Young apprentices became skilled craftsmen. Yet the daily rhythm remained comfortingly familiar. At another stall, a bead maker carefully displayed necklaces upon folded linen cloth. The tiny beads had been shaped from colorful stones, shells, and glazed materials that caught the warm afternoon light. Blue, green, white, deep red. Each necklace required countless hours of patient work. Tiny holes had been drilled one by one. Every bead had been polished. Every strand carefully tied. Women examined the necklaces quietly. Some searched for gifts. Others simply admired the skill involved. Even those who bought nothing often paused to enjoy the beautiful colors. Beauty had its place alongside usefulness. The scent around the bead maker's table was subtle. Smooth stone warmed by sunlight. Fresh linen. A trace of cedar oil used to polish wooden display trays. Nothing overwhelmed the senses. Everything blended gently into the greater atmosphere of the market. The sounds had changed once again. The steady calls of merchants had become quieter. Instead, conversations lingered. People no longer asked only about prices. They asked after families. They exchanged invitations. They spoke about tomorrow's work. One woman mentioned that bread would be baked early before sunrise. Another planned to visit relatives across the river. A fisherman wondered whether the current might be especially calm in the morning. Such conversations floated softly through the lanes like leaves drifting upon slow water. Above the rooftops, swallows circled gracefully. They dipped and turned through the warm evening air, catching insects that danced in the fading light. Their wings moved so quickly that they seemed almost silent. Only now and then came the faint whisper of feathers passing close overhead. Near the grain market, several pigeons gathered around scattered kernels left behind after measuring sacks. They pecked patiently at the ground. No one chased them away. There was enough for everyone. A little farther on, a cat stretched lazily beneath a wooden cart before settling once again into the cool shade. Its eyes remained half-closed, though one ear turned whenever footsteps approached. It had spent the entire day wandering among fish stalls, bread ovens, and grain baskets. Now it simply rested. Like the people around it, the cat understood that evening was slowly arriving. The smells of the marketplace shifted once more. Fresh bread from the afternoon ovens. Warm honey. Roasted onions. Cooling clay. Palm leaves. River water carried on the breeze. Smoke rising gently from cooking fires beginning to appear outside nearby homes. Some families had already left the market and returned to their courtyards. Others remained, finishing small purchases before sunset. The smell of evening meals slowly spread across the city. Stews simmered quietly inside clay pots. Flat loaves warmed beside glowing coals. Fresh herbs were chopped with careful hands. Dates were placed into small bowls for children waiting patiently nearby. Every aroma drifting through the market hinted that home was drawing closer. The light continued to soften. The sky above the western desert became pale gold, slowly deepening toward gentle shades of amber. The marketplace seemed wrapped in that warm light. Even the oldest mud brick walls looked beautiful for a little while. The rough texture of every stone became clearer. The woven roofs cast delicate patterns of shadow upon the ground. The river reflected tiny flashes of sunlight between passing boats. No one spoke of the beauty directly. There was no need. They had seen it countless times before. Yet somewhere within every familiar heart, the quiet arrival of evening always carried a feeling of peace. The day's work was slowly finding its natural ending. There would still be baskets to carry home. Animals to feed. Bread to share. Children to wash before sleep. Lamps to light as darkness gathered. But for now, the market rested in one of its calmest moments, where the voices of neighbors blended with the gentle rustle of palm leaves, the distant splash of oars upon the Nile, and the comforting sense of bread, herbs, warm earth, and cooling stone, all drifting together beneath the slowly fading Egyptian sky. The golden light of late afternoon slowly deepened, and the marketplace seemed to exhale after a long day beneath the Egyptian sun. Nothing changed all at once. It happened so gently that few people noticed the moment itself. One shadow became a little longer. A breeze lingered a little longer beneath the awnings. The voices of merchants softened until they blended with the quiet sounds of footsteps and the distant river. The marketplace had its own way of preparing for evening. There was no signal. No bell. No announcement. Each person simply understood. Years of living by the rhythm of the sun had taught everyone when to begin gathering their goods, when to finish one last conversation, and when it was time to think of home. The Nile flowed nearby with the same patient movement it had carried since long before anyone could remember. Its surface reflected the lowering sun in gentle ribbons of gold that drifted slowly downstream. Small boats continued to move across the water, though fewer than before. The busiest hours on the river had passed, just as they had in the market. One fisherman guided his narrow boat toward the bank with slow, careful strokes. His net lay folded neatly beside him. It was still damp from the river. The scent of fresh water clung to the woven fibers. As he stepped ashore, he lifted the net across one shoulder with the ease of someone who had repeated the motion thousands of times. Waiting for him near the landing was his youngest daughter. She carried a small basket lined with clean linen. Without many words, she helped him arrange the remaining fish inside. The work needed no explanation. She had watched her father do it since she was very small. Now her own hands moved with growing confidence. Together they walked toward the marketplace, where a few evening customers still searched for the day's freshest catch. Nearby, a baker opened the mouth of his clay oven one final time. The warm glow inside illuminated his face with soft orange light. The last loaves of the day were ready. He lifted them carefully with a long wooden paddle. Steam curled gently into the cooling air. The smell spread through the nearby streets. Fresh bread always seemed especially comforting as evening approached. Perhaps it was because people were already thinking about supper. Perhaps it was because families would soon gather around simple meals after long hours of work. The baker stacked the loaves into woven baskets. A young apprentice covered them with linen cloth to keep them warm during the short journey home. Not every loaf would be sold. Some would feed the baker's own family. He smiled quietly at the thought. His children would already be helping their mother prepare the evening meal. One loaf would likely disappear before it even reached the table. Children everywhere seemed to have the same gift for discovering warm bread. The scent of roasting onions drifted from another corner of the market. A woman stirred a clay pot resting above glowing coals. She had spent the entire day selling vegetables. Now she prepared supper before beginning the walk home. The onions had softened until they became sweet. Lentils simmered gently beside them. A handful of herbs disappeared into the pot with a quiet stir of the wooden spoon. The smell floated across the nearby stalls. Several passing merchants smiled. The aroma reminded them of kitchens waiting at home. As the air slowly cooled, more birds returned to the city. Swallows circled above the rooftops for a final time before settling beneath sheltered beams. Pigeons gathered along the tops of mud brick walls, puffing their feathers against the evening breeze. From somewhere beyond the marketplace came the soft cooing of doves hidden among palm branches. Their calls rose and fell gently. The sounds seemed to belong perfectly to the fading light. A donkey driver loosened the straps around his faithful animals. The heavy baskets they had carried all day were finally empty. One donkey lowered its head gratefully toward a small pile of fresh reeds placed beside the road. The driver rubbed its neck before offering cool water from a clay bucket. The animal drank slowly. Its ears flicked lazily as tiny flies wandered through the warm evening air. The man spoke softly while checking each leather strap for signs of wear. Tomorrow would bring another journey. Good equipment deserved careful attention. Nearby, a rope maker rolled the last finished coil of the day. His fingers felt stiff after many hours of twisting rough fibers together. He flexed them gently before placing the rope onto a wooden shelf. The smell of dried flax surrounded his little workshop. Loose strands rested across the ground like pale golden threads. His grandson appeared carrying a small oil lamp. The flame was not yet needed outside, but the workshop had already begun to grow dim. The boy placed the lamp carefully upon the workbench. Its soft light flickered across coils of rope, wooden tools, and baskets filled with fresh fiber. The old man smiled. He remembered carrying that same lamp for his own grandfather many years ago. Some memories never truly left. They simply settled quietly inside the heart, returning whenever familiar moments appeared again. Across the marketplace, the linen merchant folded his final cloth. Dust that had gathered throughout the day was shaken gently into the air before the fabric was stored inside a wooden chest. The scent of clean flax remained even after a full day beneath the open sky. He closed the lid slowly. Tomorrow morning it would be opened once again. The same cloth would catch the morning light. The same neighbors would stop to examine it. The marketplace repeated itself in comforting ways. Each day was different. Each day was also familiar. Children continued helping their parents. Some carried empty baskets. Others gathered small tools left beside market stalls. A little girl carefully collected smooth stones that had held down the corners of her mother's woven cloth during the windy afternoon. She placed each stone into a basket with great seriousness. Every task mattered. Even the smallest pair of hands found useful work before the day ended. Nearby, two brothers carefully swept the ground around their father's pottery stall. Tiny pieces of broken clay disappeared into a woven basket. Dust rose briefly before settling once more. The shelves stood nearly empty now. Many jars had found new homes. Only a few remained, glowing softly in the golden light. Their smooth surfaces reflected the last sunlight of the day. The potter touched one finished water jar with quiet satisfaction. It had taken many days to complete. Tomorrow perhaps another family would carry it home. The marketplace itself slowly grew more spacious. Where crowded paths had been filled with customers only hours before, there was now room to walk without brushing shoulders. The sounds echoed a little more clearly. Footsteps upon packed earth. The creak of wooden cartwheels. The soft flap of linen awnings being untied. The gentle knock of clay lids placed upon storage jars. Each sound stood alone for a moment before blending into the peaceful evening. Far beyond the market, fields beside the Nile also settled toward rest. Farmers walked home along narrow paths between irrigation canals. The day's tools rested across tired shoulders. Some carried hoes polished smooth by years of use. Others balanced bundles of freshly cut reeds. Their pace was slow but steady. The hardest work had already been done. The smell of damp earth lingered upon their clothing. The rich black soil left behind by the Nile flood had nourished another season's crops. That same soil had stained countless feet and sandals through generations. To many farmers, its scent was one of comfort. It meant life. It meant another harvest. As twilight approached, more cooking fires appeared across the city. Thin streams of pale smoke rose gently into the evening sky. Their scent reached the marketplace on the soft breeze. Wood smoke. Fresh bread. Stewing beans. Roasted garlic. Warm herbs. The smells blended together so naturally that it became impossible to separate one from another. They simply became the smell of evening itself. An elderly scribe packed away his writing tools with great care. His reed pens were cleaned one by one. The ink jars were sealed with small clay lids. Sheets of unused papyrus were rolled tightly and tied with linen cord. Writing required patience. So did preserving the tools that made writing possible. Before leaving, he looked once across the marketplace. Many familiar faces had already disappeared toward home. Others waved quietly as they passed. Tomorrow they would meet again beneath the same awnings, beside the same bread ovens, along the same dusty streets. There was comfort in that certainty. Above the city, the sky slowly changed from warm gold to soft shades of rose and pale violet. The first evening star had not yet appeared, but the light carried the promise that it soon would. Palm leaves whispered gently whenever the breeze returned from the river. The Nile itself reflected the changing colors with calm dignity, as though it had watched countless evenings unfold in exactly the same quiet way. The market did not resist the coming night. It welcomed it. Work gradually gave way to rest. Trade slowly became conversation. Conversation slowly became peaceful silence. And beneath the fading light, the lingering sense of fresh bread, cool river water, drying reeds, warm clay, sweet figs, fragrant herbs, and wood smoke drifted softly through the nearly empty streets, wrapping the ancient marketplace in the same gentle calm that had settled over it at the end of thousands of ordinary Egyptian days before. The evening continued to unfold with quiet patience. The last warmth of the sun lingered upon the tops of the mud brick walls, while the lower street slowly slipped into gentle shade. The marketplace, so full of movement since before sunrise, no longer hurried from one task to the next. Instead, it settled into a peaceful rhythm that belonged only to the closing hours of the day. The sky above the Nile became softer with every passing moment. The bright gold of late afternoon faded into warm amber, then into delicate shades of rose that rested along the western horizon. Far above, the blue grew deeper, preparing for the first stars that would soon appear one by one. The people noticed these changes without needing to stop their work. Their lives had always followed the sky. There were no clocks hanging upon walls. No bells marking the hour. The changing light itself gently guided the day. One by one, merchants began closing their stalls. The fruit seller carefully inspected the figs and dates that remained. The ripest fruits would be taken home and shared with his family before they became too soft. Firmer dates were placed inside woven baskets lined with dried palm leaves. He tied each basket with simple cords made from flax and lifted them onto a waiting donkey. The donkey stood quietly. Its long day had nearly ended. Its coat carried a thin layer of desert dust that glowed softly in the evening light. The merchant gently brushed its neck with his hand before fastening the last basket into place. The animal blinked slowly, almost sleepily. Around him, similar scenes unfolded all across the marketplace. The vegetable sellers gathered their remaining onions, garlic, leeks, and cucumbers into neat bundles. The herb merchant tied dried mint and coriander into small bunches, hanging them carefully beneath a cloth to protect them from the cool night air. The basket maker stacked his woven goods one inside another, creating tall towers that were surprisingly easy to carry. Everything had its place. Every movement reflected years of quiet habit. Near the edge of the market, where the road gently sloped toward the river, a woman filled several clay jars with fresh water before beginning the walk home. She lowered each jar into the river with practiced hands. The cool water splashed gently against the smooth clay. Tiny circles spread across the calm surface before disappearing into the current. The jars became heavy almost immediately. Yet she lifted them with calm confidence. A folded cloth rested upon her head. One jar balanced there with remarkable steadiness. Another rested comfortably against her hip. Her daughter walked beside her carrying a much smaller jar. She smiled proudly. One day she too would carry the larger jars. Learning happened slowly. Little by little. Season after season. The marketplace itself was one of life's greatest teachers. A little farther away, the fishermen prepared for tomorrow before today's work had fully ended. Their boats rested beside the muddy bank, gently rising and falling with the quiet movement of the Nile. One man spread his fishing net across smooth stones to dry. The evening breeze moved lightly through its woven threads. As he inspected each section, he searched for tiny tears that might allow fish to escape. Whenever he found one, he reached into a small pouch hanging from his belt. Inside were short pieces of cord. His fingers tied careful knots without hesitation. The repairs were almost invisible. Years of practice had made every motion graceful. Nearby, another fisherman cleaned his wooden paddle. He wiped away traces of mud and river reeds before leaning it against the side of the boat. He knew that caring for simple tools made them last for many years. Nothing useful was neglected. Not a paddle. Not a basket. Not a clay pot. Even sandals received attention before they were placed beside the sleeping mat each night. Inside the marketplace, the smell of food slowly became richer. Families preparing to leave often shared small evening meals before beginning the walk home. One merchant unwrapped bread baked only a short time before. His wife sliced fresh cucumbers and onions onto a simple clay plate. Their young son eagerly reached for a warm piece of bread. Steam still escaped when it was broken apart. The father smiled. He drizzled a little honey over one piece as a special treat. The child watched every golden drop with wide eyes. He took one careful bite. His face brightened. No words were needed. His parents laughed quietly together. Nearby, an elderly couple shared beans that had been slowly cooked with herbs throughout the afternoon. They ate without hurry. Between small bites, they watched the marketplace growing quieter. Perhaps they had eaten together like this for many decades. Perhaps they had once met in these same streets while still very young. The marketplace held countless stories like theirs. Most would never be written. Yet they lived on through familiar places, familiar smells, and familiar routines. The sounds continued to change as daylight faded. The steady conversations of business gave way to softer voices. Children's laughter became gentler as tiredness slowly settled over them. A cartwheel rolled slowly across packed earth. Leather harnesses creaked quietly. A broom swept the final traces of dust from one workshop doorway. Somewhere nearby, a clay jar was placed carefully upon a wooden shelf. Its hollow sound echoed softly through the cooling air. Birds prepared for night as well. Swallows disappeared beneath roof beams. Pigeons tucked themselves into sheltered corners high above the streets. A small flock of ibises crossed the evening sky on their way toward quiet wetlands beside the river. Their long wings moved steadily. For a few moments they formed graceful shapes against the fading light before disappearing beyond distant palms. The breeze from the Nile carried another familiar scent. Wet mud. Fresh reeds. Cool water. The smell felt wonderfully refreshing after the warmth of the day. Many people paused briefly as they walked toward home. Some stood quietly beside the riverbank for a few peaceful moments. The water reflected the changing colors of the sky. Small ripples gently touched the shore. The day's noise seemed very far away. Even though the marketplace remained nearby, the river offered its own kind of silence. Children sometimes skipped smooth stones across the shallow water. Each stone bounced once, twice, perhaps 3 times before sinking beneath the surface. The circles spread slowly outward until they vanished. The river accepted every small disturbance with calm patience. A potter loaded his remaining bowls into a wooden cart lined with straw. Each bowl rested inside another. He listened carefully as he worked. If 2 pieces touched too firmly, the gentle sound reminded him to add another layer of soft reeds between them. Protecting fragile things required patience. He preferred taking a little more time now rather than discovering broken pottery tomorrow morning. As darkness slowly approached, the city's oil lamps began appearing one after another. A tiny flame glowed inside one doorway. Another appeared beneath a workshop roof. Soon several stalls were lit by small clay lamps filled with oil and fitted with simple woven wicks. The light they gave was soft. It did not chase away the coming night. Instead, it welcomed it gently. The flames flickered whenever the evening breeze wandered through the marketplace. Their warm glow reflected from polished pottery and smooth bronze tools. Long shadows stretched across the ground. The marketplace looked different now. Calmer. Quieter. Almost dreamlike. An old scribe passed slowly through the nearly empty streets carrying his writing case. He greeted the baker. He nodded to the rope maker. He smiled at the water seller. Many of these people had known one another for years. Some for decades. They rarely needed long conversations. A simple smile carried enough meaning. Tomorrow they would meet again. There was comfort in that quiet certainty. Far above, the first stars finally appeared. One. Then another. Then several more. They emerged so gradually that it was impossible to notice the exact moment when the sky became full of them. The people of Egypt knew these stars well. Travelers used them to guide their journeys. Farmers watched them through the changing seasons. Children listened as grandparents pointed toward familiar patterns in the night. Above every king, every merchant, every fisherman, every baker, and every family, the stars patiently returned each evening, just as they always had. The marketplace, too, accepted the coming night with quiet grace. The scents of bread and roasted onions slowly drifted toward nearby homes. The smell of herbs lingered beneath woven awnings. Fresh river water cooled inside sealed clay jars. Dust settled gently onto the empty streets, waiting to be stirred again by the first footsteps of dawn. And as the last colors of sunset faded beyond the western desert, the marketplace rested peacefully beneath the white Egyptian sky, holding within its silent lanes the memory of another ordinary day, one filled not with grand events, but with warm bread, patient hands, familiar voices, gentle labor, and the comforting sounds and smells that had quietly shaped life along the Nile for countless generations. Night settled gently over the city, not as a sudden darkness, but as a quiet blanket that slowly covered every street, every courtyard, and every rooftop. The last traces of sunlight slipped beyond the western desert, leaving behind a sky filled with countless stars that shimmered above the broad valley of the Nile. The marketplace, so lively only a few hours before, had become almost still. Its narrow lanes were empty now. The woven awnings hung quietly without the busy hands that had lifted and lowered them throughout the day. Wooden tables stood bare. Clay jars rested in orderly rows behind closed shutters. Baskets that had once overflowed with grain, herbs, vegetables, and fruit now waited patiently for another sunrise. The silence was never complete. Ancient Egypt was rarely silent. Instead, the sounds simply became softer. The breeze whispered through palm leaves. A distant dog barked once before settling again. Somewhere beyond the marketplace, an owl called into the warm night air. The Nile answered with its own gentle voice, its steady current brushing against reeds and the sides of moored boats. The river never truly slept. Even in darkness, it continued its slow journey northward, carrying cool water through the heart of Egypt. A fisherman remained awake beside the riverbank. His small oil lamp rested on a flat stone beside him, its tiny flame dancing whenever the breeze passed. Tomorrow's fishing net lay spread across his knees. The day's repairs were finished, but he inspected it once more. His fingers moved slowly through every knot. Touch after touch. Loop after loop. There was comfort in checking the work one final time before sleep. He had learned long ago that careful preparation often made the following day gentler. The lamp illuminated only a small circle around him. Beyond that circle, darkness stretched quietly toward the river. Above him, the stars reflected faintly upon the calm water. He looked up for a moment. The familiar patterns greeted him like old friends. He had watched them since childhood while sitting beside this same river. Many evenings had passed exactly like this one. He welcomed their quiet repetition. Not far away, inside a modest mud brick home, the baker's family gathered for their evening meal. The room was simple. Its walls held the warmth collected throughout the day. A single oil lamp rested in a shallow niche, filling the room with soft golden light. The fresh bread baked during the afternoon still carried a little warmth. When it was broken apart, a gentle cloud of steam escaped into the air. The smell filled the small room. Bread, honey, cooked lentils, roasted onions, fresh herbs gathered that morning. Simple food. Comforting food. The children ate slowly now. The excitement of the day had faded. Heavy eyelids blinked more often. One little boy leaned gently against his mother's shoulder while chewing the last piece of bread. His younger sister quietly traced patterns in the dust beside her sleeping mat with one finger before her mother gently brushed the marks away. Soon the family would sleep. Tomorrow would begin before sunrise. Across the city, similar scenes unfolded inside countless homes. A potter carefully washed clay from beneath his fingernails. His hands had shaped dozens of vessels during the day. Tiny traces of fine clay still remained within the lines of his palms. The cool water in the washing bowl turned cloudy. He smiled quietly. It had been a good day. Several jars had found new homes. Others waited patiently for tomorrow's customers. Nearby, his wife folded linen cloths that had dried during the afternoon. Each piece carried the clean scent of flax. She stacked them carefully inside a wooden chest before lowering the heavy lid with both hands. The soft thud echoed gently through the quiet house. Outside, sandals rested beside the doorway. They too deserved rest after carrying tired feet across dusty roads since dawn. In another neighborhood, a family of weavers finished winding the final thread onto a loom before covering it with linen to protect it overnight. The loom stood quietly in one corner of the room. By daylight it would once again become busy with movement. For now, it simply waited. The threads hung perfectly still. The evening breeze drifting through a small window barely disturbed them. The smell inside the workshop was gentle. Flax fibers, smooth wood, beeswax rubbed onto tools, fresh reeds woven into floor mats. Each scent lingered peacefully in the cooling night. Farther from the city center, where homes became more scattered, farmers returned from checking irrigation canals one final time before sleep. Even at night, water remained important. A broken canal wall discovered in the morning might waste precious water before anyone noticed. So one elderly farmer carried a small lamp as he walked beside the narrow channels. The flame reflected in the calm water. Tiny frogs called softly among the reeds. Insects hummed gently in the darkness. The farmer paused often. He listened. The quiet sounds told him much. Flowing water sounded healthy. A sudden silence might suggest a blockage. Years of experience had taught him to understand the land through careful listening. Satisfied that everything remained in order, he began the slow walk home beneath the stars. The air had cooled enough that the smell of warm earth became richer. During the heat of the afternoon, much of the fragrance had hidden beneath dust and sunlight. Now it returned. Fresh soil, river mud, dry straw, palm wood. The scents blended naturally with smoke drifting from evening cooking fires. Most meals had already been eaten. Only a few fires still glowed softly outside family homes. A woman stirred glowing coals with a stick before covering them with ash. Enough warmth would remain to help start tomorrow's fire before dawn. Fuel was valuable. Nothing useful was wasted. Near the marketplace, the night watchman began his quiet rounds. His work required patience more than strength. He carried a wooden staff and a small lamp whose light reached only a short distance. His sandals made soft sounds upon the packed earth. Step after step. The streets he had walked all day now looked completely different beneath the stars. Closed stalls cast long shadows. The market square felt larger without crowds. Occasionally he stopped to listen. A breeze. A cat moving between baskets. The distant splash of an oar upon the river. Finding nothing unusual, he continued on. The marketplace slept peacefully beneath his careful watch. Several cats wandered through the empty streets. The fish stalls had long been cleaned, yet faint traces of the day's scents remained. One cat paused beneath a familiar table. This had been its favorite resting place throughout many afternoons. It curled into a small circle and tucked its nose beneath its tail. Within moments it was asleep. The city belonged to different creatures now. Bats fluttered silently above rooftops. Night insects sang from gardens and canal banks. A fox somewhere beyond the fields searched quietly beneath the moonlight. Life continued. Only its rhythm had changed. The moon slowly climbed above the eastern horizon. Its pale light spread gently across the Nile. The river became silver instead of blue. The boats resting along the banks rocked almost too softly to notice. Their ropes creaked quietly against wooden posts. Reeds whispered as fish disturbed the shallow water below. A pair of ducks floated silently near the shore before disappearing into darker water. Inside the marketplace, the smell of the day still lingered. Not as strongly as before. Only gentle reminders remained. A trace of fresh bread. A faint sweetness from dates left inside covered baskets. The earthy scent of onions. Dry herbs hanging beneath cloth. Clay cooled by the evening air. Smooth cedar wood. Leather sandals. Reeds. Honey. The smells rested quietly together, waiting for morning to awaken them once more. A young apprentice lay awake for a little while before sleep finally arrived. His shoulders ached pleasantly after carrying baskets all day. He thought about the merchant who had praised his careful work. He remembered watching the boat arrive with fresh papyrus. He smiled while remembering the warm smell of bread drifting across the marketplace that afternoon. Tomorrow he hoped to learn something new. Perhaps his master would finally allow him to arrange the display by himself. The thought stayed with him until sleep gently carried it away. Across the city, one by one, lamps were extinguished. Tiny flames disappeared behind mud brick walls. Darkness settled more deeply into quiet courtyards. Only the stars and the moon remained to light the ancient streets. The marketplace rested peacefully now, holding within its empty lanes the memory of thousands of footsteps that had crossed its dusty ground since dawn. It waited without impatience for another morning, when the first baker would again warm the ovens, the first boat would touch the riverbank, the first merchant would lift a woven basket into place, and the familiar sounds and comforting smells of life beside the Nile would slowly awaken once more. The deepest hours of the night settled softly across the Nile Valley. The warmth stored inside the mud brick walls slowly drifted back into the cool air, leaving homes comfortable for sleeping. The marketplace rested beneath the wide sky, quiet and undisturbed, while countless stars watched over the empty streets just as they had through generations beyond memory. The moon stood high now. Its pale light reached into the narrow lanes where busy footsteps had passed since before sunrise. The woven awnings cast gentle patterns upon the ground. Rows of closed shutters stood peacefully in the silver light. Baskets rested upside down upon wooden tables. Clay jars waited silently beside doorways. Everything seemed to be taking a long, slow breath before another day would begin. The scents that had filled the market had grown faint, yet they had not disappeared. If someone walked slowly through the quiet streets, they would still notice them. A whisper of dried mint hanging beneath a cloth. The earthy fragrance of grain resting inside sealed storage jars. The sweet memory of honey lingering in a wooden spoon. The soft smell of flax folded neatly inside chests. The faint trace of fish washed from smooth stone before nightfall. Nothing was strong. Everything blended gently into the peaceful air. Near the marketplace stood a public well where many families gathered each morning. During the day it echoed with voices, splashing water, and the creak of heavy ropes. At night it became one of the quietest places in the city. A single clay bucket rested beside the well. Its rope hung motionless. The wooden beam above it no longer groaned beneath the weight of full water jars. The stone edge, polished smooth by countless hands over many years, reflected a little moonlight. One small gecko rested there, perfectly still. Its bright eyes watched tiny insects drawn toward the fading warmth of the stone. Even the smallest creatures found a place in the sleeping city. A little farther away, inside a modest home, an elderly grandmother woke for a brief moment. The room was dark except for the soft glow of moonlight entering through a small window. She listened quietly. Beside her, grandchildren breathed slowly in peaceful sleep. Somewhere outside, palm leaves rustled gently. Far away, a donkey gave one sleepy call before becoming silent again. Satisfied that all was well, she pulled a woven blanket a little closer around her shoulders and closed her eyes once more. She had heard these nighttime sounds for most of her life. They were comforting. Familiar sounds often became part of sleep itself. Across the city, a family of fishermen slept beside their neatly folded nets. The nets had dried completely after sunset. Tomorrow they would once again be carried to waiting boats before dawn. The youngest son dreamed of rowing farther along the river than his father had yet allowed. In his dream, the Nile stretched endlessly beneath bright morning skies. Birds flew low above the reeds. Fish shimmered beneath clear water. His hands held the paddle with perfect confidence. Dreams often carried the simple hopes of everyday life. Nothing grand. Only the quiet wish to grow older, stronger, and wiser. Near another neighborhood, a potter's workshop stood peacefully beneath the stars. Rows of finished jars rested upon wooden shelves. Some were large enough to hold grain through many months. Others were shaped for cool drinking water. Small oil lamps waited to brighten future evenings. The scent of baked clay filled the workshop. Warm during the day. Cool and earthy at night. Even in complete stillness, the workshop seemed full of quiet purpose. Every vessel waiting there would soon become part of another family's daily routine. One jar might carry fresh water from the Nile. Another might protect grain through the dry season. Another might hold olive oil or fragrant herbs. Simple objects often lived long lives. Long after the hands that shaped them had grown old, they continued serving new generations. Along the riverbank, the reeds swayed gently whenever the breeze wandered across the water. Tiny insects sang among their stems. Frogs answered from hidden pools nearby. The sounds blended together into a peaceful chorus that had echoed through Egyptian nights for thousands of years. Somewhere beyond the reeds, a crocodile rested motionless upon a muddy bank. The people of Egypt respected such creatures from a safe distance. At night, the river belonged as much to its animals as it did to its boats. The stars reflected upon the calm water, breaking softly whenever fish rose briefly beneath the surface. The Nile carried every reflection downstream. The moon, the stars, the silhouettes of palm trees, the quiet lights of a few distant homes. Everything drifted gently together. In one courtyard, a small oil lamp still burned. A scribe remained awake longer than most. He sat cross-legged upon a woven mat with a sheet of papyrus resting before him. His reed pen moved slowly. Not because he hurried, but because he wished to finish one final record before sleeping. The scratching of the pen was almost too quiet to hear. Outside, the world remained peaceful. Inside, the little flame danced softly. When the writing was finished, he rolled the papyrus carefully and tied it with a linen cord. He cleaned the tip of the pen, covered the ink, blew gently across the lamp. Darkness quietly filled the room. The city seemed even more peaceful after the last light disappeared. Farther toward the fields, a shepherd stirred briefly as his flock shifted nearby. The sheep rested close together inside a simple enclosure made from reeds and wooden posts. One lamb searched for its mother before settling comfortably beside her. The shepherd listened without opening his eyes. Everything sounded normal. The animals were calm. He relaxed again. The smell of dry straw, warm wool, and earth surrounded him. To many people those scents might seem ordinary. To him they smelled like home. Not far away, several donkeys slept standing beneath a shelter made from palm trunks. Their loads had been removed hours earlier. Leather harnesses hung neatly upon wooden pegs nearby. One donkey twitched an ear while dreaming. Perhaps it remembered the day's familiar journey through the marketplace. Perhaps it dreamed only of fresh reeds waiting in the morning. The stable itself carried a comforting smell. Hay, leather, wood, dust. Animals at rest. The scent changed very little from season to season. Back in the marketplace, the breeze shifted once more. It slipped through the empty lanes, touching every quiet stall. It passed beneath the baker's awning, where the clay ovens had cooled enough to rest until morning. It wandered through the herb seller's display, lifting the faint fragrance of dried mint and coriander. It moved across the basket maker's neatly stacked work, carrying the gentle smell of woven reeds. It brushed the smooth surfaces of polished pottery. It stirred a forgotten feather lying upon the dusty ground. The marketplace itself seemed to dream. Not with thoughts, but with memories. The memory of footsteps. The memory of cheerful greetings. The memory of baskets being lowered onto tables. The memory of children laughing while chasing one another between the stalls. The memory of warm bread leaving the oven. The memory of fresh fish arriving from the Nile before sunrise. Every stone seemed to hold those ordinary moments. They had happened not just today, but yesterday, the week before, the year before, and across countless generations. A place became familiar because of such repetitions. Morning after morning. Season after season. Life gently returned to the same streets. Above everything, the constellations continued their slow journey across the sky. Many Egyptians knew them well. Farmers noticed how they changed with the seasons. Boatmen used them while traveling before dawn. Priests observed their careful movements from temple courtyards. Children listened as elders pointed toward bright stars and shared old stories beside evening fires. The heavens turned slowly. The river flowed steadily. The marketplace rested quietly. Together they formed the gentle rhythm of a world that measured time not by clocks, but by sunrise, sunset, floodwaters, harvests, and the faithful return of another peaceful dawn. For now, however, dawn was still a little way off. The night remained calm. The city remained asleep. Only the breeze wandered through the silent market, carrying the last faint traces of bread, herbs, river water, clay, and warm earth, while beyond the quiet rooftops the patient Nile continued its endless journey beneath the stars, never hurrying, never stopping, and never forgetting the ordinary lives that had always gathered along its timeless banks. The night slowly moved toward its quietest hour. The stars seemed brighter now, hanging above the Nile like countless tiny lamps. The air had become cooler than it had been at sunset, and a gentle freshness drifted across the river, touching the sleeping city before continuing toward the distant desert. The marketplace remained still. Its dusty streets, so full of footsteps during the day, now belonged only to the breeze. The woven roofs above the stalls barely moved. Wooden shutters rested against mud brick walls. Large storage jars stood where they had been placed before darkness arrived. Every basket, every table, every clay bowl waited patiently for the first light of another morning. Nothing felt abandoned. Everything simply rested. In one corner of the market stood the baker's ovens, now cool enough to touch. During the day they had glowed with heat, filling the streets with the comforting smell of fresh bread. At night they became silent shapes against the walls, their smooth clay surfaces slowly releasing the last warmth stored inside them. Nearby, sacks of grain rested neatly upon wooden platforms to keep them above the dusty ground. Each sack held the careful work of many hands. Farmers had planted the grain months before. The Nile had watered the fields. Workers had harvested every stalk beneath the hot sun. Others had carried the grain to storage. Millers had ground it into flour. Bakers had turned it into bread. One simple loaf carried the quiet effort of an entire community. Nothing in the marketplace truly belonged to one person alone. Every trade connected one family to another. The grain seller depended upon the farmer. The farmer depended upon the river. The baker depended upon the grain. The fisherman traded for bread. The potter supplied the jars that stored the grain. Each ordinary task quietly supported the next. Long before people spoke of complicated systems, they simply lived them. Not far from the grain stalls, a family of mice ventured carefully from a tiny opening beneath an old wall. The marketplace was peaceful enough now that they felt safe searching for scattered kernels left behind after the day's business. They moved quickly. Tiny paws made almost no sound upon the packed earth. One stopped beside a single grain of barley. Another discovered a crumb of bread no larger than a fingernail. Within moments they disappeared again into the darkness. The city fed many small lives alongside its own. A cat resting beneath a wooden cart opened one eye. It had noticed the movement. For a moment it remained perfectly still. Then, deciding that sleep was more inviting than a midnight hunt, it stretched lazily and settled once more upon the cool ground. The cat had enjoyed a satisfying day near the fish sellers. There would be other mice tomorrow. The night was too peaceful to disturb. Far above, the moon had begun its slow journey toward the western sky. Its pale light washed gently across the roofs of the market. Clay jars reflected faint silver highlights. The edges of woven baskets cast delicate shadows across the ground. The marketplace looked almost transformed beneath the moonlight. The bright colors of the day had disappeared. Only gentle shapes remained. A row of pottery looked like quiet sentinels standing guard. Palm trees became graceful silhouettes. The narrow street seemed wider in the calm darkness. Along the riverbank, a light mist began to form above the water. It was thin enough that the opposite shore remained visible, yet it softened every reflection. The boats appeared almost dreamlike. Their outlines blurred gently as they rocked against their moorings. The ropes holding them creaked softly with each slow movement. A fisherman sleeping inside one boat stirred beneath a woven blanket. The motion of the water had rocked him gently for hours. To him, it was as comforting as sleeping in a quiet home. The river had cradled his family for generations. Its movements were as familiar as breathing. Nearby, reeds bent slightly as the breeze passed through them. Each stem brushed lightly against another. The sound was soft, almost like whispered conversation. Tiny insects continued their steady song from hidden places among the marsh plants. Occasionally a fish disturbed the calm surface with a small splash before disappearing beneath the dark water. The river remained alive throughout the night. In a modest home near the marketplace, an old basket maker woke before the rest of his family. Not because morning had arrived. His body had simply grown accustomed to waking for a few quiet moments during the night. He sat outside his doorway and looked toward the stars. The air smelled fresh. The earth had cooled. Somewhere nearby, someone had left bundles of newly cut reeds stacked beneath a shelter. Their clean, grassy scent drifted gently across the lane. He breathed deeply. Tomorrow those reeds would become baskets. His fingers already imagined the familiar movements. Fold. Bend. Weave. Tighten. Trim. The work had become part of him. Even in the quiet hours before dawn, he could almost feel the texture of the reeds between his hands. After a few peaceful moments beneath the stars, he returned inside and lay down once more. Sleep came easily. The city remained wrapped in silence. Only a few homes still showed the faint glow of oil lamps. Perhaps someone cared for a sick relative. Perhaps a mother soothed a restless baby. Perhaps a traveler had arrived late and was quietly welcomed inside. Most lamps, however, had long since been extinguished. The darkness itself felt gentle rather than empty. The marketplace remembered every sound of the day. The creaking carts. The cheerful greetings. The soft bargaining between merchants. The laughter of children. The steady scraping of a potter's tools. The rustle of linen. The splash of water poured into waiting jars. Now all those sounds had faded into memory, leaving only the peaceful promise that they would return with the dawn. Beyond the city, the fields stretched toward the desert. The irrigation canals reflected narrow ribbons of moonlight. Date palms stood quietly along their banks. The smell of damp soil rose gently into the cool air. That rich black earth, renewed each year by the Nile's flood, had sustained families for countless generations. Tomorrow, farmers would again walk these paths before sunrise. They would check the water, lift their tools, speak quietly with neighbors. The work would continue just as it always had. Not because anyone demanded it, because life itself moved with the river. Time passed differently here. Not in hurried moments, but in seasons. Flood. Planting. Growing. Harvest. Rest. Then the cycle began again. The marketplace reflected that same rhythm. Every morning it bloomed like a flower opening to the sun. Every evening it gently folded itself closed beneath the stars. Nothing dramatic. Nothing sudden. Only the calm repetition that gave comfort to everyone who depended upon it. A faint breeze carried the scent of baked clay from the potter's quarter. Even after the kilns had cooled, the smell lingered in the walls and shelves. Nearby came the faint sweetness of dried dates stored inside covered baskets. A trace of garlic remained where vegetables had been arranged only hours before. The fragrance of herbs still clung to woven bundles hanging beneath shelter. All the smells of the marketplace rested together through the night, like old friends waiting patiently for another day. High overhead, the stars slowly turned. The people sleeping below would not notice their quiet movement. Yet generations of Egyptian sky watchers had learned to read those patterns. They marked the changing seasons. They hinted at the coming flood. They guided boats traveling before dawn. The heavens above and the Nile below moved with the same quiet certainty. Between them rested the ordinary lives of bakers, fishermen, merchants, potters, weavers, scribes, farmers, children, and grandparents. Their names may have faded into history. Their footsteps have long disappeared from the dusty streets. Yet the marketplace they filled with warm bread, patient work, familiar voices, gentle smells, and simple kindness still lives in the imagination, carried forward by the quiet rhythm of another peaceful Egyptian night that continues, unhurried, beneath the endless stars. The eastern horizon is still dark, and dawn has not yet reached the quiet streets. For a little while longer, ancient Egypt rests peacefully beneath its blanket of stars. The marketplace sleeps. The baskets remain stacked where careful hands left them. The clay jars wait patiently beside silent doorways. The bakers' ovens are cool, holding only the memory of warm bread that filled the air through another ordinary day. The scent of dried herbs lingers beneath woven awnings. A faint sweetness from dates remains inside covered baskets. Fresh river water rests quietly within smooth clay vessels, waiting for the first thirsty hands of morning. Beyond the empty streets, the Nile continues its endless journey. Its waters never hurry. They glide gently beneath the moonlight, carrying quiet reflections of stars, palm trees, and distant lamps that slowly fade one by one. The reeds along the riverbank whisper softly whenever the night breeze passes through them. Somewhere in the darkness, a fisherman sleeps peacefully beside his folded net. A baker dreams of tomorrow's first loaf. A potter rests tired hands that have shaped clay since sunrise. A farmer sleeps knowing that the fields will welcome him again with the first light. Children breathe slowly beneath woven blankets while parents rest beside them, comforted by the familiar sounds of home. The city itself seems to breathe. Slowly. Calmly. Peacefully. Every wall of sun-dried brick holds the warmth of countless days. Every stone along the marketplace remembers gentle footsteps that came and went through seasons beyond counting. Every quiet corner has known laughter, patient work, shared meals, and simple conversations carried on the warm desert air. History is often remembered through great temples, towering monuments, and the names of powerful rulers. Yet tonight, we have wandered through another kind of history. The history of ordinary mornings. Of flower dust floating through beams of sunlight. Of fishermen lifting dripping nets from the Nile. Of merchants arranging vegetables with careful hands. Of children learning their first tasks beside parents and grandparents. Of cool water poured into waiting cups after long hours beneath the Egyptian sun. Of bread shared while evening shadows slowly stretched across dusty streets. These quiet moments rarely found their way onto carved stone. Yet they filled the lives of millions of people who called the Nile their home. Generation after generation, the marketplace awakened before sunrise. It welcomed boats from the river. It welcomed travelers from distant villages. It welcomed neighbors who already knew one another by name. Then, as evening returned, it slowly grew quiet once more. That gentle rhythm continued for centuries. The seasons changed. Children became parents. Parents became grandparents. New voices filled the streets while older ones became cherished memories. Still the Nile flowed. Still the bread baked. Still the baskets were woven. Still the lamps glowed softly after sunset. And beneath the same stars that shine above us today, countless ordinary lives quietly unfolded with patience, kindness, and steady purpose. Now the night has become wonderfully still. The breeze has softened. The last lamp has gone dark. Only the river continues its gentle song, flowing endlessly through the heart of Egypt, just as it always has. So, as the ancient city rests, you may leave these quiet streets behind. Leave the warm smell of fresh bread drifting through the marketplace. Leave the gentle splash of water against waiting boats. Leave the whisper of palm leaves beneath a starlit sky. Leave the soft footsteps upon dusty roads. Carry with you only the calm they offered. May the peaceful rhythm of the Nile linger like a quiet breath. May the warm glow of ancient lamps fade gently into comfortable darkness. May the patient voices of merchants, bakers, fishermen, weavers, potters, and farmers become softer and softer, until they are no more than distant echoes carried upon the evening breeze. The stars remain overhead. The river keeps flowing. The ancient marketplace sleeps peacefully once more. And with the quiet world of ancient Egypt resting safely beside the timeless Nile, the night grows deeper, the air grows softer, and silence gently welcomes you into a restful and peaceful sleep.